So put yourself in a hypothetical business situation. We are helping this university, which we will call U of X. Looks like a pretty cool campus too. So this university comes to us, U of X, and says we have a $25 million shortfall. So just take a second and think about what's your first reaction? What do you propose we do? Awesome. So this is one of the biggest shifts that happens in consulting. And it's something when I share with people, they're pretty shocked at how subtle but powerful this is. So the typical response is answers like we can increase tuition, we can ask for more money from the state, we can cut costs on IT, right? These are just solutions, ideas to come up with. The problem is this is not how we approach problems to get to a very rigorous answer of imagining all possibilities. So instead, we shift from solutions to the consulting approach, which starts with identifying the problem, coming up with hypotheses, doing analysis and research, and we'll go much more into this later in the course, and then you're going to get to recommendations. So what this does instead is comes up with a bunch of explanations, breaks down the problem in a way that makes sure you're looking at all the possible options, and then sets you on a path to verify which are going to be the most powerful levers to recommend to this University of X. So let's look a little more in depth at this University of X scenario. So let's say we do a little digging, and I'm just going to define the problem for you. I'll show you how we do this in more depth later in the course. But based on current estimates and spending obligations, U of X is facing a budget shortfall of $25 million. Based on requirements from the state, which you learn about, the only options they have are to close this gap through spending decreases or revenue increases, meaning they have to balance this shortfall. There is no option to have this on the books. So what would we do first? We'd come up with hypotheses. In this situation, there's two clear options outlined by the problem. U of X can either cut costs or U of X can increase the revenue it's taking in. And what's powerful about these is you want to make sure that your hypotheses are set up in a way that they can be turned into questions that you can assess and then do research into later. The next thing you want to do is develop sub-hypotheses. So for cut costs, you might start coming up with some questions like, could we cut the hours of service? Can we increase adjunct hiring? And for revenue, similarly, can we increase tuition? Can we increase fees and pass them on to students, etc.? So this is really the beginning process of a consulting project. You might frame out a bunch of questions. You're going to look at this in a very much more in-depth structured manner, which we'll cover later. But this is really how you frame the problem, and then you go off and do the research and deep dives that consultants get paid for. So let's say we're testing one of these sub-hypotheses. So tuition hikes, what might we do? So in a consulting project, you might do a few things. You might start benchmarking comparable schools. Looks like we're a better value than most schools, so maybe there's some wiggle room to increase tuition. Survey the students. Looks like the students are strongly opposed. And number 3, you might look at the macro landscape of student debt issues and see where it all fits in. So this was a very quick run through of the kind of deep dive that might take months in a consulting project. So I just want to outline how some of these pieces might fit into the consulting process. The consulting process is very iterative. It's both top down, some of the hypothesis, the structuring, the identifying the problem, and it's also bottoms up, where you're looking at the nitty-gritty data, the analysis, doing research, and trying to make sense of it all. So at the beginning phase, you might start coming up with the problem definition, then doing your hypotheses, And that's when you first go down, right? You might pick a couple of things just to test out, are we headed in the right direction? You might test to see, okay, can we actually do tuition hikes? You often learn a lot as part of that process. And that leads you to go back and question some of the hypotheses you come up with a better structuring for your project. And you'll go back and forth. As you get further in the consulting project or solving a problem more generally, you're going to tweak things and it's going to get a little less dramatic each time and hopefully closer to an alignment with a solution that you're finding through the analysis. That is going to be communicated in a way that's going to be persuasive. And then finally, you're going to end and communicate top down. You're going to start where you're going to end where you started. And we're going to talk about this in the pyramid principle. So you're going to go deep into the data and then work your way up and then communicate it top down. So start with the solutions, but this time the solutions you're starting with are backed with a pretty deep and rigorous consulting process.